Hi guys, it's Claire. Welcome back. Today I'm here to talk about the best book I've read so far in 2019, and that is Milkman by Anna Burns. And it's taken me a little while to put together a review for this one just because it is such a rich and singular kind of book. I really don't think I've ever read anything quite like it, and so I'm feeling slightly intimidated by the task ahead, but I'm going to try and do this book justice just because it is so phenomenal. So let's get right into it. In case you don't already know, Milkman follows an unnamed 18-year-old narrator who is living in Belfast in the 1970s at the height of the Troubles, when she starts being followed by a middle-aged man who is known in her area as Milkman and who is rumored to be a high-profile renouncer of the state. And up until the moment when Milkman pulls over in his ominous white van and interrupts our narrator during one of her long, solitary runs through the parks and reservoirs, we get the sense that she has been a somewhat aloof member of her community, prone to going on long runs by herself, and more damningly, reading 19th century books while walking because, quote, "I did not like 20th century books because I did not like the 20th century." And in a city where the streets and daily life are constantly punctuated by gun bursts and car bombs, our narrator attempts to keep herself at arm's length from the political conflict by looking the other way, by burrowing into her books, and by keeping to herself. And although this book isn't strong on plot, the Milkman's pursuit of our narrator does serve as a kind of catalyst for her unwelcome realization that she cannot, in fact, remove herself mentally or physically from her lived environment, that opting out is not an option, and that Milkman's slow encroachment on her threatens to sink her into a kind of social and political quagmire. And through this character's slow and unwilling awakening to that fact, Anna Burns not only immerses you in this particular community at this particular time, but she also considers the extent to which individual subjectivity both resists and is shaped by geography and history. And she looks at how constructed national and political and religious borders create very real borders between friends and families and neighbors, and between the public and the private self. And she's able to accomplish all of this in no small part through the liquid rhythm of her prose and the elliptical style of her storytelling and her absolute mastery of naturalistic dialogue and the cadences of the local language. And I want to start with Burns's approach to craft and language just because so much of the conversation around this book has been about the difficulty of the prose and its run-on sentences and long paragraphs. And I have to say, I often find experimental approaches to structure or style in literary fiction to be overly self-conscious or affected or effortful. But in this book, everything about the way Anna Burns writes feels not only incredibly natural, but crucial to the story being told. And it allows Burns to evoke not only an incredibly powerful sense of place, but also the teeming psychology of this character that we're following. The language here really is so striking and singular, and that's due in part to its very colloquial and provincial texture. Early in the book, the narrator describes the prevailing atmosphere of Belfast during her teenage years, saying, "The thing was, these were paranoid times, these were knife-edge times, primal times, with everybody suspicious of everybody. You could have a nice wee conversation with someone here, then go away and think, that was a nice wee unguarded conversation I just had there, at least until you start playing it back in your head later on." And that's just one small example of the way that Burns beautifully captures the sounds and rhythms of 1970s Belfast. And what's remarkable is that she does so without ever using any proper nouns. The Troubles as a political conflict is never actually named, nor are any cities or countries or religions or political groups ever directly identified. And even the characters in this book are known only by their social role or their relation to the narrator. Chef, the issues women, wee sisters, third brother-in-law, maybe boyfriend. And again, in a different kind of book, this might feel pretentious or affected, but here it just helps to reinforce the insularity and limited horizons of this community. When someone mentions the country over the water, it can only be one country. And it also illustrates the extent to which your public persona or how you are known in society overrides whatever your true self is. And it reflects the prevailing adage of say nothing, the stifling of free and open expression, and the contradictory expectation instructions to never speak of anything directly, but to also understand implicitly what is and is not permitted. Which is what makes the structure of this novel, with its run-on sentences and lack of paragraph breaks, so interesting, because I think it could, in one way, be read as a reaction to or a subconscious rebellion against that prescriptiveness and those hemmed-in borders of public life. This novel is a nearly unending flow of our narrator's thoughts and memories and observations, and in a community of say nothing, this young woman's inner life is depicted as this unruly profusion of words and feelings that serve as a kind of liberating contrast to her claustrophobic surroundings. But even within that freedom, there is a constant thrum of anxiety, and although the narrative focuses on this character's interior life, her thoughts and memories are constantly interspersed with and interrupted by her present lived reality. It's an elliptical narrative that is constantly circling back on itself and creating for the reader the feeling of being pulled into a kind of vortex of tangled relationships and the violent, grim happenings that define life in 1970s Belfast. And so you can feel the tension between the narrator's internal attempts to block out the noise and the car bombs, and her ultimate inability to ignore the external world, and the plummeting dread she feels whenever she's running alone and hears that soft click of a surveillance camera. And so throughout the book, you get this sense of things about to boil over, of things being strung tight and stretched thin, and of the precarity of individual sanity under such strange circumstances. And so in that way, Burns's use of language and the specific structure and rhythms of her storytelling are not experimental for their own sake, but rather create a sense of atmosphere and tension between the narrator and her surroundings, and they also lay the groundwork for Burns to explore the many key themes of this novel. First among them being that question of what happens to the individual amidst such constant violence and surveillance and paranoia. Our narrator's community is a powder keg of informers and renouncers and suspicions and accusations, and it's an environment where every citizen has to negotiate a public and a private self, which is something our narrator stubbornly resists, offering as little of herself up for public speculation as possible, saying, "I refused to be evoked, drawn out, shocked into revelation. Instead, I minimalized, withheld, subverted thinking, dropped all interaction surplus to requirement, which meant they got no public content, no symbolic content, no full-bodiedness, no bloodlessness, no passion of the moment, no turn of the plot, no sad shade, no angry shade, no panicked shade, no location of anything, just me, downplayed, just me, devoid, just me, uncommingled." But the narrator's very unwillingness to play by the rules, her insistence on doing things like reading while walking, and now her supposed association with Milkman attract attention and make her a subject of gossip and rumor anyway. Offering nothing, it turns out, is not enough, and the narrator learns the hard way that she has far less control over her public self than she thought. And there's this staggering scene in the book where the narrator enters a chip shop and suddenly realizes with the full force of it how her community sees her and how an entire narrative has been forming around her without her consent. And just as Milkman subtly encroaches on her physical space and peace of mind, so too does her community with its whispers and its condemnations and its willful misperception rob her of her autonomy and force her into a role and a story that she wants no part of. And so you have these layers of violation going on, and you start to understand how difficult it is to maintain a hold on one's identity, how resistance starts to capitulate under those kinds of pressures. And as this kind of cruel and violating scrutiny works to alienate people from themselves and their community, so too does the constant threat of physical violence warp one's sense of what's normal and acceptable. There's an incredibly striking moment in the book when the narrator recalls an event event from her childhood when the state police marched into her area and slit the throats of all the neighborhood dogs. And she's describing this horrifying scene and the slimy, pelty mess of this pile of killed dogs. And then she proceeds to say that she'd completely forgotten about it up until this moment, which is insane, but also a testament to the kind of mental suppression and the blocking out of trauma that is necessary to survive and carry on in this kind of environment. To allow yourself to feel those normal human emotions makes you vulnerable, and to acknowledge the stupidity and waste of it all makes you a traitor. And to trust someone or show someone your true self feels incredibly dangerous and almost transgressive when this threat of violence and retribution hangs over everything all the time. And it reaches such a pitch of absurdity that it becomes impossible to see straight, impossible to parse what's normal from what's not normal, to the point that simple acts of empathy start to seem twisted and unnatural. There's a moment when the narrator is walking home late at night and discovers the head of a dead cat in the middle of the street. Again, maybe not the best book for animal lovers, but she feels this sudden, inexplicable urge to bury the cat's head. And it's an impulse that springs from basic human compassion. But in this city, at this particular time, to be seen gingerly wrapping up a cat's head in a handkerchief would seem suspicious and grotesque. And it's a small, weird moment, but it's also just heartbreaking and shows the extent to which, in this surveillance society, people are incredibly isolated from each other and from their emotions, and that natural human instinct for love and tenderness and compassion is just utterly suppressed. And what I think Burns ultimately does most beautifully is illustrate the extent to which living in such a rigid and prescriptive society absolutely destroys people's ability to determine their own destinies and imagine a world with broader horizons. And this is exemplified in an absolutely stunning scene about a third of the way into the book, when the narrator is at an evening French class downtown and her instructor asks the students to describe all the colors of the sunset outside the window. And the narrator thinks, even then, even though there were more colors than the acceptable 3 in the sky, that evening still I kept my mouth shut. And now others in this class, all older than me, some as old as 30, also weren't admitting it. It was the convention not to admit it, not to accept detail, for this type of detail would mean choice, and choice would mean responsibility. And what if we failed in our responsibility? Failed too in the interrogation of the consequence of seeing more than we could cope with. Worse, what if it was nice, whatever it was, and we liked it, got used to it, were cheered up by it, came to rely upon it, only for it to go away or be wrenched away, never to come back again. Better not to have had it in the first place was the prevailing feeling, and that was why blue was the color for our sky to be. It's just this gorgeous and absolutely devastating scene that gets at the heart of what really is at stake in all of this. What's at stake for the narrator and the people in her French class and her entire community is the ability to see and acknowledge beauty and truth and nuance and different shades of possibility, to see and experience all of that color and to feel empowered and exhilarated by it rather than fearful of it. It's just an incredible scene, and that was the moment in this book when I went from liking it to feeling like, wow, this is the real deal. And I realized that a lot of this discussion makes this book sound like a real drag, but it's not. It has this kind of rapturous and almost magical quality that just makes it an absolute pleasure to read. And on top of that, it's also incredibly funny in certain moments. It's a black, absurd kind of comedy that highlights the ridiculousness of the times without undercutting the very real stakes of the violence that's happening around them. And without spoiling anything, in its last moments, there is also a buoyant kind of hopefulness to this book that you might not expect. And I initially questioned that hopefulness because it seems like almost too tidy a bow for what is otherwise such an unruly and unconventional book. But really, what might seem too whimsical or too fairy tale an ending for this kind of story is really just the ordinary trying to assert itself against all odds. And this book closes with a familiar scene that might be a radical victory, or it might be mere normality, or it could just be the same story circling back on itself once again, repeating the same old pattern. But that possibility that it might be a new beginning is enough to leave you with the sense of the maybe hopeful. Those are all my thoughts on Milkman by Anna Burns. If you've read this book, I would love to discuss it more down in the comments below. And if you haven't, I cannot recommend it enough. It might not be for everyone, but it is just a remarkable, remarkable book. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Bye!